And now, please welcome to the stage the Executive Director of City of Asylum, Henry Reese.
Pays to advertise, right? Welcome everybody to City of Asylum at Alphabet City. It's really an unusual event for us here tonight in many, many ways. We're broadening, I think, the scope of what we've presented in presenting literature that's often not recognized as literature, but it's literature that goes back. I can't tell you. I was saying earlier that I've been a member of the Mary Marvel Marching Society since the 60s. I have on my wall a refunded check because they ran out of stationery back in the 60s with a handwritten note from the secretary framed. So I can lay claim to being a devotee and saying that I really, in many ways, my love of literature came from reading the comic books. And I have not kept up the same way, I would say, with the comic books over the years. So this rejoinder and this reuniting is really been very interesting for me personally. And it's also really interesting to see Jude Dubia, because we just saw him. We were just in Sweden, in Malmo last week for a meeting of the International Cities of Refuge. And so it really struck home the message that he delivered, and seeing him again in person, how important it is what we're doing here in Pittsburgh, protecting writers who are endangered. With us, we have, I think, one writer tonight, Osama Alamar, who's here from Syria, and who writes short fiction and is writing a novel. His work has been very well picked up now by New Directions. So along with all the authors here, when the bookstore gets going, hopefully you will grab a copy. Tonight we're going to have what was described as sort of a fireside chat. And leading it will be Yona Harvey. Yona is also someone who goes way back with City of Asylum. Yona has done what? Writers in the Gardens, jazz poetry, readings, just about every site we've had over our history here, so she can probably recite a lot of this better than I can because she actually keeps it to some degree of accuracy, whereas I tend to kind of ramble on in this kind of free-form way, not inspired by our current president. I preceded him and I try to do it truthfully, but anyway. Yona is a really great poet, and so this conjoining that I think all the writers here, or both writers tonight, have careers outside of what we're having them here tonight, and part of that discussion will involve this whole career notion of what it is like to be a writer and write in different genre and be recognized different ways. But Yona is really quite a fine poet, and that's certainly where her primary literary activity and her real reputation is. She's the author of Hemming the Water, which, again, you'll be able to get when the bookstore gets open. It's been kind of hidden now as we've moved the shelves. The winner of the Kate Tufts Discovery Award from the Claremont Graduate University and a finalist for the Hurston Wright Award. Her work has been anthologized in many publications. I'm not going to recite them all, but it's all over the place. She's received an individual artist grant from the Pittsburgh Foundation in nonfiction and participated in workshops in the original residencies of Cave Canem, who, as an institution, is a great partner to us, but is also the home of many, many great poets, so it's no surprise that Yona is associated and has been for so long. She's also done, I've got a real resume here that I could go on and on and on. Yona has one that's like this. She teaches now at the University of Pittsburgh and is very much involved with their creative writing department, and it's a pleasure to have her here tonight under auspicious occasions on a beautiful day for a beautiful discussion. Welcome, Yona. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry. I have here on my notes big, 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 big thank yous. They're not obligatory thank yous. They're really heartfelt thank yous. So just really quickly, thank you to the City of Asylum community, especially especially Sylvia, who's not here. She's out of the country. Henry Reese, Diane Samuels, Hannah, Ann, Nathan, and also to the Toonseum board and community, aka the little engine that could. Deisha Filyaw, Brenna Painter, Marcel Walker, Anthony Letizia, Judy Height, Alexa Astarte, and Chris Bushman, and also to the local comics and comics art community here in Pittsburgh, including Bill Boychell, Phantom of the Attic Comics, Wayne Wise, and Ed Piskor. And if I forgot anybody, I'm sorry. I'm just like sleep deprived. I haven't been this excited in a long time. I think not since like I got the gig to write for Marvel. I feel like that's the last time that I just stayed up all night being excited, trying to work on the story. And that's how I felt last night thinking about Evan Narcisse coming to Pittsburgh. I just thinking all night long about what we're going to talk about and seeing him. You know, we've never met. We have communicated through text and email, and I'm just so excited that he's here. I'm excited to introduce him. So, Evan Narcisse is a journalist, critic, blogger, and most recently, author of the amazing Rise of the Black Panther comic, which it covers a lot of ground, particularly the origin story of King T'Challa, and I'm sure we'll talk about that. Evan's Twitter handle reads Haitian Sensation, video games, comic books, blackness. And with those sparse monikers, he manages to give his followers just enough information about his writing and his life. But those mysterious little gaps between also linger, should anyone want to explore or dig around. Some of his most recent posts, for instance, include when the Legion of Superheroes got freaking weird, a new trailer for Stephen King's Castle Rock shows us horror around every corner. Superman and Lois are going to the White House Correspondents' Dinner this week. The best Superman stories of the modern era, and the story that made me realize how lonely Superman must be. Evan's writing moves smartly through the world of geek culture, from television to comics to Universal FanCon postponements to film. But it's that lonely Superman headline that really gets me. Without a doubt, he's one of the most intelligent beings I've ever encountered. That is really no exaggeration. Like, even in a text thread, I can feel like the neurons zipping and bobbing and weaving lightning fast. But he has this really startling emotional intelligence and vulnerability that seems to let loose whenever he writes about the comics he loves. Comics are deeply rooted to his childhood and development, and just as a sample, here's what he writes about Superman. That volume was first published by Tor in 1983, which means if I read it in that first year, I would have been 11 years old. The Evan of 1983 was skinny, gawky, and awkward as all hell. My introvertedness made more painful by my mother's moving us to Long Island. Whether it was the borough of Brooklyn where I was born or the town of Hempstead that we'd just moved to, I never felt like I fit in anywhere. That's probably why a story that showed Superman as someone who felt all alone in the cosmos hit me so hard. I first discovered this gift that Evan has when reading his post, The Black Superhero Who Helped Me Navigate a White World, one of his many spectacular pieces on Power Man and Iron Fist. It's that piece that I emailed to Sylvia here at City of Asylum and said, we have got to bring Evan to Pittsburgh. Evan's work should be e-blasted to skeptical parents and naysayers who fail to understand the richness and the depth of comics and the lifelong impact they can have on young readers, especially young readers of color. At the same time, though, I guess it's possible that the gaps in resistance make the writer. An origin story without obstacles or resistance would probably be pretty boring after all. So maybe that's something that we can talk about tonight as well. So please help me give a huge, warm welcome to Evan Narcisse.
So, quick aside, Leslie, who works here at City of Asylum, hands me an agenda. Here's what's gonna happen tonight. I'd seen it in an email already, saw it again on paper. And I was gonna tell Yona, they got 5 minutes here to introduce me. You're not gonna need 5 minutes. So that was complete and total emotional sucker punch. I'm like right here when it comes to like where the tears are. So, yeah.
Yeah? Okay. Great. And I didn't even say everything I wanted to say. I was like, I don't want to be too long.
You would have broken a brother, but okay.
Okay, so Evan is really great off the cuff. I am not great off the cuff, so I'm going to work with my notes. But I do, just by way of introduction, for people who may not know you and your work as well. You were born in Brooklyn. And you spent a lot of your childhood in the library and reading comics.
Yeah.
But at the same time, your mother frowned upon reading comics a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
So can you talk about that?
I have still deep emotional scars from her picking up every comic that's lying on the floor of my room. And there was a lot of them because I was a slob. Picking them up angry. This is not real. The work you're supposed to be doing, this is not gonna get you a scholarship. I'm a single mother. You need to get a scholarship if you wanna go to college. 30 years later, writing about comic books. My mom passed away some years ago, and I'm not so altruistic as to say that I wouldn't be a little bit petty in letting her know that her predictions weren't necessarily accurate. But yeah, there was resistance. You know, she wasn't having it. She came from a very traditional Haitian Caribbean background. She wanted me to be a doctor, a lawyer, architect, those good professions. You know, and I went to NYU with the half-hearted intention of doing pre-law and going to law school. She's like, well, you like to write, you like to argue, be a lawyer. And I got into writing. I always wanted to write, and I told her that. She said, you're gonna be broke your entire life. And she wasn't entirely wrong. But I like what I do a lot more than some of my friends who wound up becoming doctors or lawyers. And it was at NYU where I took a class called Minorities in the Media, taught by Professor David Dent, who's still there, and was pretty much my mentor. And he said, hey, you can write. Let's get you in the program. So I wound up with a minor in journalism and entered into journalism as a career. And from there, I became a cultural critic. We can get more granular on that if you want, but
yeah,
we can also keep it moving.
No, that's good. I mean, on the one hand, I love that you, I hate to say the word defend, but defend being a cultural critic because you love it.
Yeah.
And I actually think that plays a huge part in the way that you write comics. Like, your current run is really spectacular, and I think your background definitely.
I mean, I'm writing the kind of comics I would want to be reading, right? I'm writing the kind of comics that are trying to replicate the successes of the best, not the best, of the creators who I most admire in this current moment of time. The thing about comic book characters is that T'Challa's been around for like 50, 60 years. And there's a multivalence to his kind of ethos as a symbol. And there's so much there to tap into. The guy who's writing the main Batman title for DC Comics, Tom King, I think does that spectacularly well. He complicates Batman and Bruce Wayne in a way that feels fresh. And Batman's been around for 70 years. it's more almost 80 at this point. Like to find a fresh angle like is a real achievement. And I feel like I had the same kind of challenge. Like, okay, what story can I tell about T'Challa and Wakanda that hasn't been told before? And I was able to locate that story by virtue of being a critic and having a rather comprehensive knowledge base about the character. In other words, being a big nerd.
But you do, I mean, on the artistic side, you give T'Challa this really rich interior life. So, I mean, there is this history of that character, but I think maybe some of that was missing.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. This is something, I think we talked about it. So the secret backstory to our relationship is that we were in a group chat. It was me, Ta-Nehisi Coates, and Yona. Me as somebody who knew Ta-Nehisi and liked his work on Black Panther, as opposed to the other political commentary stuff that he does too. I got a kind of a backstage view of what you guys were doing.
Right.
I kind of knew what the challenge was from like a notional perspective, right? But in terms of actual execution, it still proved to be really, really hard. And, trying to find that fresh angle, it's like, okay, I have the nugget, but you've got to pot it in the soil, right? That lets it grow. And that part was really challenging. And I'm very conscious of the fact that I'm standing on the shoulders of like my forefathers. Some of my favorite writers in comics have written this character. Dwayne McDuffie wrote this character. He's somebody who co-founded a very influential imprint called Milestone Media in the 1990s. And that is foundational work for me. If anybody remembers the Static Shock TV show was a character that originated from Milestone. And Dwayne McDuffie is one of my idols. Christopher Priest wrote this character. He wrote the Black Panther. Christopher Priest was the first full-time writer and editor at both Marvel and DC Comics. A man of uncompromising vision and principle, to the point where when he got pigeonholed for being just a Black writer, he left comics for over a decade. And he came back 11 years later and is killing the game. His run on Deathstroke currently is amazing. He wrote a Justice League run, which is great. And as a quick aside, when I was at the Black Panther movie premiere in January, I hugged Priest because he means so much to me. And to have that moment with him, when this character that means so much to me, meant so much to him, to have that be validated on the screen was a lot. And for to be able to be just in the same room with him was everything. And I'm not saying my work comes anywhere close to his, but like I'm very, very cognizant of what came before me, and trying to maintain what I feel like is a tradition of excellence, of Black excellence, and move forward a little bit, So like, I don't want to sit here like the cat's pajamas. This is a legacy that has gone on before me, and I'm just trying to move it forward a little bit. And it's very much like T'Challa in the series, He has a whole tradition of Black glory that he's trying to preserve, but also realizes it's going to have to evolve if it's going to continue.
Right. I feel like you have a great phrase around that. Maybe you say like between tradition and modernity.
So it's the reason the Black Panther was my favorite superhero character almost from the moment I read him the first time, was that he stands at the crossroads between tradition and modernity. On one hand, he's got this legacy, which is like the deepest, most heartfelt wish fulfillment for anybody in the Black diaspora. It's a piece of Africa that never got fucked with, pardon my language, which is so meaningful. That's your tradition. Modernity is everything he comes up against, right? He's not the kind of Black Panther king that his father was or his grandfather was, where all they had to do was keep things secure. He makes a decision, ultimately, for what he believes is the good of the country. We have to interact with the outside world. We have to become part of it. Not just to help them out, but to help ourselves out too, culturally and psychologically. And that's the reason I love this character, because as a child of immigrants, I felt like I had the same kind of challenge. Like, okay, I'm Haitian, but I don't speak Creole. It's terrible. I'm not gonna embarrass myself. I can't cook the way my mom did, but I still have all this pride about what it means to come from that background. How do I preserve that? How do I transmit that to my daughter? How do I let her know that this is a thing to be proud of? And I feel like, again, that's a conundrum that's faced anybody within the Black diaspora, and if you're living in a predominantly white space. So this is a thing that you're aware of when you're touching this character. And I think the reason the movie was so successful is because those themes are at the forefront of the movie. The cool special effects and technology, that's great. The superhero story structure is awesome, but it's very much about a personal journey about what it means to be Black in this world.
Sure. You also see that sort of theme of strong women, more nuanced women. And so in your run, the first issue, you are framing the story with the journals of T'Challa's birth mother, and then also later Queen Ramonda, when after the birth mother passes away. So could you talk a little bit about
part of it's, for better or for worse, all my work as a critic or a creator comes from personal spaces. So I was raised by a single mother. So, and as problematic as she was in many ways, her strength is what allowed me to survive in a world where I felt like it wasn't made for me. There's those of you in the audience who know comic books knows there's that cover burst from old Marvel comics, trapped in a world he never made. And that's how I felt as a kid. Existentially, you feel so out of sync with the mainstream, the values that get normalized. And my mother, through her stubbornness, and she didn't always make it easy for me, but her example as an immigrant from a Caribbean community that was francophonic, she had so many obstacles that she had to overcome. So I knew what that kind of strength looked like up close, right? And I wanted to ground that into T'Challa's backstory. It's always been there. A lot of things that I'm doing, I'm able to do because there was precedent. So what I can do is recontextualize the precedent and emphasize certain themes. But that very much came from my mom. Inyami, T'Challa's birth mother, was a pet project of mine, and she's only in the one issue. But one of the advantages of having been a Black Panther my entire life is I knew that her story hadn't been told, none of it.
Right.
She was like a name on a page. I think she'd been drawn in some alternate universe stories, but she wasn't a real character. And I want to make her a real character, And thinking about this series, the history of Wakanda, T'Challa's a king, he's a warrior. And that's a lineage you can trace back throughout various comic stories and the imagined history of the country, right? There were probably people who preceded him who were great strategists or politicians, charismatic leaders, great warriors, great fighters. Where's the scientist part come from? And I decided to ground that in his mom and have his mom be a scientist who helped usher in this golden age for Wakanda, in part to make it meaningful. And again, the other personal part of that for me is my daughter is a really avid reader. And I know she gets that from me. I used to love to read. I still do. And she loves to read. So every time I'll pick her up from school, she'll have her nose in a book, and I'm like, nature versus nurture, I know which one that is. And I want to bring some of that same kind of experiential kind of fodder to the comic.
Right. How conscious were you of those types of decisions? I guess this is kind of like a maker question, even like, or a process question.
It's funny because I had a lot of thematic pillars set out when I was kind of like doing wool gathering and the architecting of this in the early stages. I knew that, you know, I wanted to show the exact moment where the world learned about Wakanda, which, you know, was something that never was shown in the comics before. In the comics, the Black Panther first appears in Fantastic Four number 52. It was published in June 1966. And he lures the Fantastic Four to Wakanda to test his mettle because he has a mission of vengeance that he wants to carry out. He wants to make sure he's ready. So it is a very hilarious reverse tourism kind of story. We're going to see the place fantastic. What the hell? We're being hunted. So I knew I wanted to look at that story from a different angle and show what happened before it. And I knew I wanted to show the exact moment that the world learned about Wakanda, like I said, because what happens is you see that story in the Fantastic Four. For a couple of years, the status quo of Wakanda is it's hidden. People know about it, but not really. It's kind of whispered like an urban legend. Then a couple of years later, in Marvel time, the Wakanda Design Group is being traded on the New York Stock Exchange. So there had to be a perestroika moment, like a decloaking that was never shown. And I knew that I wanted that to be like the kind of core of the story. But like that stuff like that I had planned out.
Okay.
Just the other day I was thinking back on the series and the work, and I tweeted out that there's a whole theme that I didn't know I was laying in there, but is there in every single issue of the series subconsciously. And I haven't talked about it publicly, but it's basically memory and the use of memory as a mechanical device. There's a moment in issue 4 and 5 where we see one of the characters create a device that lets him read memories from other people. Mm-hmm. And I was like, that's just the MacGuffin, right? That's just like the switch that you flip to make the action go this way, right? But then I thought back, I was like, well, in issue 4, Dr. Doom and T'Challa are talking about their memories of their parents. In issue 3, there's a scene talking about memory and this and that. And I'm like, that just kind of like, to quote Ishmael Reed, it just grew. It just mushroomed out of, you know, whatever moisture what was in the plotting, and it was subconscious. So like, I wish I could say I was clever and thought about that beforehand, but it was only in retrospect. I'm like, yeah.
Yeah, that seems right though.
Yeah, it does, you know, and it's funny. Part of my career being a critic has been like, wow, that guy's really good at that stuff. And makes me wonder now, like, well, did he plan it, or was it some accidental happenstance that worked out? Right. You know, and it was a hurdle for me to think like, okay, I'm a guy who writes about comics, and I'm a guy writing comics, and you know, there was a fair amount of psychological weightlifting that I had to do. Like, oh, you can do this, and at first I wasn't sure I could, and I still look back. You know, you always want to revise, right? Mm-hmm. But now you're like, oh, okay. So a lot of that stuff is stuff, you know, you were preparing for this moment, which feels really weird and karmic.
Yeah. Are you gonna do more? Can you talk about that?
You know, I have stuff I'm working on creatively that I can't talk about. I have an idea for a Marvel Comics character that I haven't pitched yet. I want to work on the pitch before I actually present it to anybody. But I can say it's connected to a character that appears in this series. Yeah, I can say that.
Okay.
It's probably news to everybody. But yeah, it's something I'm not ready to talk about at all yet. But it's a thing I think I could do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But would you say, well, no, but never mind. Okay.
Let's keep them guessing.
Yeah. Okay. But would you? Okay, no buts, but just a leap. So you have said that you feel like good critique is an art unto itself.
Yeah.
And I totally love that grab. Can you talk about why?
Part of that is just like a real brass tacks, practical retort to, I think, a misconception that gets held in geek culture critic circles You know, when the post on my home site, IO9, which is the site that I write for every day, they announced what I was doing. I was writing Black Panther. Back in November of last year, I had to do a post that was basically, here's why I'm not writing my comics anymore. I'm actually writing comics. And then I couldn't announce what the project was, so there was a lot of speculation. Then a few months later, you know, we got to say that I was writing a Black Panther comic. And some of the responses were, he's did it. He's achieved the summit. I never got into criticism to backdoor my way into the actual craft. You know, I'm not a frustrated comic book maker. I'm not a frustrated video game maker. I like being a critic. That's the deal. That's the end. It's not the means to another end. And so when I said that, it was like, no, I like writing. I like engaging with work and then talking about my engagement in a way that hopefully resonates with other people, you know? I'm watching a show on Netflix now that I love, and I can't wait to write about why I love it. That's just, you know, what I do. I feel like the same thing that made me detail-obsessed comic book nerd is the same thing that powers my criticism. It's like, okay,
Sure.
this means something to me, you know? Like the X-Men, you know, their symbolic power for symbols for marginalized people, like I glommed onto that before I knew I was even doing it, you know? And with characters like Black Panther, there's a more direct line of causality. But even that, I feel like my work writing about the Black Panther was different than the thought processes I had as a fan of the character.
Okay.
You know, like I wrote an essay. It's so funny to look back at this stuff now that I've actually contributed to the lore. But I wrote an essay a couple of years ago. The headline was the politics of Marvel's Black Panther. And I basically looked back at the character's publishing history and looked at all the times he'd been used as a symbol, right? The thing that's weird about this moment where the world is consumed with Wakanda mania is that, like, there was so long, and I think that you and Ta-Nehisi have a sense of this, but T'Challa didn't have a series for like so many years.
Right.
Like, you know, he'd just be like, hey, I'm in the Avengers. Hey, I'm in Daredevil. Look, he's in an Iron Man annual. And I was that dude, like, oh, they used him again. I gotta buy this. And it was like a halfway or middling story, but he was my favorite character, so I showed up. A lot of those appearances were, oh, we're gonna talk about apartheid. So who do we got? Oh, that guy, he's in Africa. You know, we're gonna talk about racial injustice. Let's have him go up against our Ku Klux Klan variant. And you know, we're all laughing. Those stories are meaningful, but like, that is a pointed political usage of that character that does not render him in full dimensionality.
Right.
You know, like, it's great that he kicked the Ku Klux Klan's ass, but he had a girlfriend that he was visiting with her family just a few minutes ago. Can he get like some dessert? Like, can the Klan wait? But yeah, you know, the first, I'd say, 20 years of the character, maybe that's unfair, but there's a certain stripe of usage for the Black Panther that aligns in that paradigm, right?
Mm-hmm.
It really wasn't until like, I'm probably getting the exact year wrong, but 1978, when Don McGregor, who's a white guy who worked at Marvel at the time, starts writing Jungle Action, that we got a sense of the interiority that T'Challa had, or could have. And you know, like, that's introduced the ideas of factionalism within Wakanda. You know, everybody ain't getting along here. You know? And the great vector in those stories was like, you've been spending all this time over there in America, and things have been going to hell here. So what you gonna do now, Black Panther? And it is the kind of care that he hadn't been receiving, you know, and didn't often receive even after that. So Jungle Action ends in the late 70s. And again, he's like, as Priest put it, the guy in the back of the Avengers group photo, like, hey guys, he'd show up on a Marvel Comics calendar, be like, we got a black guy. Not that you can tell underneath all his outfit, but it's in the name. You know, he was a character that was a signifier of diversity and inclusivity that was mostly convenient and not fully rendered.
Right.
And you know, being able to help render that out a little bit more was great. I mean, here's a quick aside. I meant to lead off with this. Like, I'm excited to be here with this woman because the work that she did with Ta-Nehisi on Black Panther and the Crew is amazing. Like, you talk about being, the weird thing about writing comics is, especially a character like this, he's been around for like 50, 60 years. So many people have written him, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I've been lucky enough to meet and talk to a handful of them, right? Like, to be lucky enough to know Yona after the stuff that you guys wrote in that series is like, I mean, you felt this man in love with Aurora, who's Storm of the X-Men. Right. You felt like you guys put him in Harlem, which is so meaningful for like people in the Black diaspora. You know, you tackled the ideas of gentrification. Like, you know, you got right at the symbolic power of the character, like inside the fiction. You know, it wasn't like, okay, we're gonna transliterate a bunch of real world stuff and wink and nod to the audience. You made it feel. You did much more than that, because that's the kind of story that he showed up in before. But this was like, no, we're gonna build out a whole new history that he can touch on and interact with. And I feel like that's the most powerful thing about the character. And the other thing is, like, I had a bit of performance anxiety because Yona's an incredible poet. Ta-Nehisi has a poetry background. The thing about comic book writing is it values economy. It values brevity, and particularly with characters like who are oriented like T'Challa, there's a lyrical aspect to the world building and the dialogue. And I feel like there was that whole bit about Empire that you guys did, and I think Ta-Nehisi said that was all you. I think it was in issue 2 of the Crew that was just it you know, it was like wow. And then you go back and you're preparing to write your own Black Panther thing, and you're like, really? Yeah, you're not gonna be able to do that.
He did it.
No, I did something different, but okay.
That's a huge compliment from you.
I mean,
because you did mention to them that we were on this secret thread. So it was the 3 of us on this thread all the time. But Evan is always the go-to person. It's just like there's nothing he doesn't know. So sometimes we would get the thread going for whatever reason.
I always felt bad. It's like, oh, here's 10 messages from me.
Like,
she's gone. She went to make a sandwich. But you know, it was like, again, I feel like the way geek cultures and fandom cultures, I feel like they're this weird inflection point now. Now that we are part of the dominant vector of pop culture, there is a weird flavor to some of the engagement where people like to. It's in my head. I call them like they're like jock nerds now. It's like, look at all the stuff I know. And my thing has never been, as a nerd or as a critic, it's not about cataloging what you know. It's not about, and then this happened in 1976, and then this. That's great, right? But my thing has always been, how do you use what you know? You know, like, are you just flexing to get some accolades for your devotion to a property or a character? I mean, yeah, but if you're being exclusive in that, that's not great. If you're using it to help make meaning for somebody else, that's something else. I mean, some of the best reactions I've gotten from people reading this series has been from other Haitian people from Haitian backgrounds. Be like, hey, you're writing this, and I can see that Haitianness in it. And I was like, Good. I feel seen. That's very intentional, you know, like.
Unpack that a little bit more.
Yeah, it's funny because I'm trying to think of a segue, but I'm just gonna jump right into it. Like, people ask me about like what it's like to write Wakanda, especially in this moment or whatever, and I can write Wakanda because I'm Haitian, you know? Like, Wakanda's a fictional country that doesn't exist, but I feel like one of the reasons Wakanda is so resonant in fans' hearts is because it's a symbol of resistance against white hegemony, right? And I know that from being Haitian, you know? I grew up hearing stories about our country was the first free black republic. It was the first nation to throw off the yoke of colonialism. And that meant something to me, you know? And when you think about, I don't want to get on too high a pedestal here, or rather a soapbox. Haiti has suffered the consequences of throwing off that yoke, of the declaring black humanity as its own thing that needs to be validated, and they recognize in the world centuries before the rest of the world dared acknowledge it, right? So for me, I'm like, that's Wakanda. You know, it was interesting, as you saw the excitement in social media ramping up for the Black Panther movie, you'd see this very nasty, trollish retort that Wakanda's not real. Wakanda's not real. What are y'all getting so excited about?
Wow.
And you know, Twitter, for better or for worse, is a place where you can answer those trollish comments. And I sent a tweet, and you have to do it without being a troll yourself. But I said, yeah, Wakanda's not real. But what is real, and what does inform Wakanda, and especially I think it informs Wakanda of the movie, is that it is an aggregation of the practices of resistance and survival and self-love that have made Black diasporan communities that have helped them survive throughout centuries of white supremacy, you know? Like, that's what Wakanda is. So it's not a real place on a map, but Wakanda's the Underground Railroad. Wakanda is the Civil Rights Movement. Wakanda is, I think any kind of Black liberation movement has the psychological energy that coalesced in this modern day understanding of Wakanda. That's why it's a symbol, you know? You'll see, you know, LeBron James drain a three and do this. And I'm like, you know, and everybody knows what it means. So, like, it is, I think, just a word that can be put onto a sensibility, an understanding, a feeling that has been around, I think, for as long as Black people have been out of Africa. You know, if you got stuff to ask, because I can just keep going.
I know. I love that about you. That's perfect. But I'll just ask, why do you think, I know you've been asked this before, so it's a lead-in, but why now? Like, why do you think
That's interesting.
everyone's ready to receive the film, and, you know, what is it about this moment?
So I've written about video games and comic books and other kinds of pop culture, and inclusivity and representation have always been really important to me. I've written about this same kind of thing in video games, and I always said that, you know, if Nathan Drake, who's the lead character in the very popular Uncharted series, if he was a Black person, ain't a goddamn thing about those games need to change. Because mechanically, you can have them say the same humor, the same game mechanics, the same everything. Because guess what? We can save the world too. And that's the thing I feel like Black Panther kind of condensed in a very attractive way. Like, it's not just like Black Lives Matter, but it's like, here's what it looks like to have Black excellence, Black glory, Black achievement, undiluted, uninterfered with, uninterrupted. And I think that's part of the reason that the audience was ready, you know, or the world was ready, because for all the you know, superhero kind of boilerplate, it's a very personal story. Ryan Coogler and Joe Robert Cole, the screenwriters and director, that's a story of interrogating your own sense of your own Black identity, right? And I think that's one layer, right? And then the other layer is, and we were talking about this at dinner, if you've ever felt like an other, like marginalized, unseen, unheard, dismissed, and you have to reckon with your own history and the gaps in your own history and how you don't fit in the kind of mainstream, generally accepted notions about what makes a person and a person's worth. If you feel like outside of all that stuff, then that movie spoke to you as well. And the comics have spoken to you as well. You know, Wakanda is the secret homeland we've all yearned for, right? It doesn't exist, but like I said before, we've created it in these different ways. And that's super meaningful. I think the other reason that the character is having this moment, of course, catalyzed by the movie, is because I think just a notion of anti-colonialism at the core of the character, right? And you guys, something you guys hit on in the crew as well.
Sure.
Like, you know, what does it mean to resist colonialism, you know, and to find a home when colonialism has ravaged the place that was home or threatens the place that is home now. The issue that you guys did with, wow, I can't believe I'm forgetting his name, the teleporter. Anyway, this is so embarrassing. Ta-Nehisi, you have, if you see or hearing this, you have full permission to roast me later.
Manifold.
Manifold, yes, thank you. Oh my God, you get a drink later. Yeah, but Manifold is this character who's Aboriginal mutant from Australia, who winds up hanging out with Black Panther. And the beautiful issue that these guys wrote was that he didn't feel at home, right? He's a mutant, so he's on the fringes of society in one way. He's Aboriginal, he's the fringes of society in another way. He winds up in Harlem, which is like, ain't nobody like me here, but it's home, and he made it home. And I think that's the appeal of Wakanda as a concept and the Black Panther as a character, is that, you know, we have to resist colonialism sometimes in these ways that are intensely personal, you know? One of the ways I was able to find a way into T'Challa's head was thinking about, you know, he's a king. He's seemingly, you know, all-powerful. He's got all the agency in the world. But this is still a man that colonialism took his father, you know? In the comic books, Claw kills T'Chaka because he comes to Wakanda, which has been a legend, like I said, whispered about throughout the centuries. He says, that fancy super metal that y'all got, I want it. And T'Chaka says, no, we don't roll like that. And he dies. So you can be the most powerful, technologically advanced country in the world. You can be the ruler of that country, and colonialism will still come for you. And T'Chaka is somebody, T'Challa rather, is somebody who suffers that wound, you know? Even as an adult, he's still trying to live up to his father. So there's a strong anti-colonialist stripe in the character. And the funny thing is, there's another track of criticism around the movie and the character that says, well, he ain't really Black. You know, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby were two middle-aged Jewish guys who created him in 1966. That's true. But part of my personal relationship with the character has been, you know, I infused him with my Blackness, right?
Yep.
Like, and I feel like even, you read those early Black Panther stories in Fantastic Four, it's funny, and I wrote this in my essay years ago, they reinforce stereotypes at the same time that they're breaking them, right? Mm-hmm. So you got this super cool, like, T'Challa's like kind of like James Bond. You know, he's smoking a cigarette, he's super cool, he sneaks up on the Fantastic Four, I got you. And you're like, whoa. At the same time, he's like, let's celebrate, we'll have a feast. And there's dancing and tribal drums and spears and grass skirts. I'm like, but you just had all that other stuff, cool stuff too. So there's a tension there that is interesting. But even within the kind of relatively naive, politically unsophisticated mode that Stanley and Jack Kirby were working in with regards to blackness, they still hit on something, a tension that could be grown on by future creators. And even then, there was an anti-colonialist element to it, which may not have been intentional. It's funny, one of the things I've encountered in recent months as all this Black Panther discourse has been happening, and it's been such a moment for Black Panther discourse, which has been great. One of the things I learned hits on this weird nugget of history. So I think you probably know this, but when Jack Kirby's initial designs for the character, he was called the Coal Tiger. Coal like coal that you mine from the earth. And it turns out that Coal Tiger was a term being used for a lot of former colonies that were coming into their own on the political stage from a financial perspective, because they had coal and oil and fossil fuels. So Coal Tiger was like, you would have thought of like Nigeria or other resource-rich countries as the Coal Tiger back in the 60s. So part of me is like, did Stan and Jack know that? Part of me is like, you know, did they know about Stokely and SNCC back in the day? Like when the college organizers that would then later go on to form the Black Panther Party, like there's always been this kind of standard disavowal that there's no connection, right? There's no connection between the Black Panthers and Huey P. Newton and T'Challa of Wakanda. But then you're like, well, how much did they really know? But the beautiful thing about the movie is that Ryan took that right back to Oakland. He's like, that thing you've always been asking, that annoying question you've always asked in interviews and whatnot, this is canon now. You know, here's somebody from Wakanda who was trying to do Black Panther Party type stuff in Oakland during the riots following the Rodney King verdict. You know, so it's a way that it's one of the beautiful metaphorical powers of comic books. Is like we can take this thing that has seemingly been galaxies apart, you know, Black political struggle in the real world, and link it to this fictional mythology, and multiply its power. And I thought that was amazing.
Yeah. It was very close to comics. I don't know what you call it, aesthetics or whatever.
Yeah,
I feel like.
it was. I mean, one of the things I always say is that superheroes are aspirational by their very nature, right? Like they show us the best and worst of humanity and its complexity when they're done right? Superman, ultimate immigrant story, comes from Krypton, raised by a Midwestern family. He passes for human, right? And he believes himself to be human, and then represents the ultimate in human potential in terms of psychological altruism and emotional altruism, right? Batman shows you how you can recover from the worst trauma in the world and turn that dysfunction that follows into some kind of strength in the hopes that you get to save other people from ever experiencing that kind of pain, you know? And I feel like each character has that core nugget in their construction, this existential nugget. And I feel like T'Challa, like I was saying before, it's part of his anti-colonialism. Part of it is about trying to be excellent and Black in a world that has been ordered to deny such things from ever happening.
I don't know where, I think we're supposed to have questions from the audience, is that right?
Nathan, Leslie, where are we?
Hi, hello. Can we give a round of applause here for Evan and Yona? So we will be moving into a Q&A portion, taking questions here from the audience. My name is Leslie, and Hannah is over there also to take questions from this side of the stage. So if you could please raise your hand, wait for the mic. We'll be there. We want to hear your questions. Okay.
Is it possible that there would be a spin-off with focusing on the Dora Milaje?
Oh, again, I don't work for Marvel technically, but those comics are already happening. I want to say it's called Wakanda Forever, and it's basically Ayo and Anika and Okoye, three prominent members of the Dora Milaje in the comics, basically teaming up with other Marvel characters. So I think the ones they've announced are going to be teaming up with Spider-Man and then with the X-Men. And I believe it's Nende Okorafor, who's a Nigerian science fiction writer. Yeah, we can clap for Nende. She's also been doing other Black Panther work. Man, totally forgetting the name of the series now. Black Panther, not the Sound of Fury. What's the other one? I'm sorry. But Nendi's been doing great science fiction work in the prose world, and she's been writing Black Panther stuff for a little while now, and she's writing those books. So yeah, I mean, I love the Dora Milaje. Like, Roxane Gay's World of Wakanda storyline was amazing and really complicated those characters with a lot of layers. Yeah, they're great. You're welcome. I was glad I was able to answer that.
Hey, how you doing, Evan? I probably have about a decade on you in terms of age and reading comics.
We'll compare that later.
But you know, it's funny. My dirty little secret as a guy who's been reading comics
You got to be
since
dirty to continue.
the late 60s is that the Black Panther was actually a character that had to grow on me.
Yeah.
I liked other Black characters a lot more. And I wonder, what was it about the Panther that caused you to relate to him, other than what you've already talked about? Was there some emotional resonance, or the fact that you were Haitian?
That's part of it. The other part of it is, you know, it's so funny to see these characters enjoying, you know, media adaptation success now. Because I didn't rock with Luke Cage back in the day. Black Lightning, that wasn't for me. You know, what needs to be understood about the early mode of Black superhero characters was that they were largely created and written by well-intentioned white men who didn't know that very many Black people, actually. They were also premised on what was successful in other media, namely the Blaxploitation film movement, right? So you get Luke Cage, and he's like cussing and hot-tempered and super strong. And yeah, no, like, you know, even, I have to go on a quick aside. See, this is what happens when you're a nerd. I'm like, do I talk about this or do I not? Sweet Christmas is what Luke Cage says instead of cursing. And it always read as mad corny to me, but then you find out that one of the writers, Archie Goodwin, who was a super influential Marvel editor back in the day, he was trying to approximate the kind of prose that Chester Himes put in his Harlem detective novels. So again, good intentions, wonky execution leaves you with some stuff that Evan can't get with. And the same thing with Black Lightning. You know, he's a superhero who competed in the Olympics and came back to the ghetto where he grew up in to try and clean it up. Well, I didn't grow up in the ghetto. You know, I grew up in a largely Hasidic Jewish community until I was 10 years old. I didn't relate to those characters, you know? Wow, you going right for the Haitian Achilles heel here. For those of you all who don't know, Brother Voodoo is another Marvel Comics character, practitioner of magic, voodoo. He's Haitian, and no. Like, I didn't grow up knowing anything about voodoo. We didn't talk about voodoo at home. Hey, Mom, what about that sacrifice at the back? No, we didn't do that. So there was no vector for me to relate to him. But with T'Challa, it was vastly different. Part of it was he was an immigrant, right? Even as a superhero, like, you know, Hawkeye would be talking with him in an issue of the Avengers. So in that country you're from, they probably don't do things like this. It's like, well, my friend, you see, we do things like, and I was like, see, he's this weird, awkward, kind of like, he's not automatically gonna be like fitting in with Iron Man and everybody else. He's different. He stands apart from them. He was thoughtful, ponderous, compassionate. A lot of those early Black Panther stories in Jungle Action and written by Don McGregor, he was emotionally tortured. What am I gonna do? I have this girlfriend from who's Black American, and my Wakanda subjects are dissing her. Oh my God! And then I got this guy trying to, you know, like he had all this feeling up in here. I was like, yeah, I can get with you. Whereas Luke Cage would have been like throwing a desk through the window because he was mad about something. Like that's not how I got down. So that's where my kinship with T'Challa started. I felt like he was intellectual and wasn't ordered around like these really high temperature emotional attitudes the way some of the other Black characters were. It didn't talk jive either. Like I'm not. That's not how I grew up. So I got with it. Another question.
Do you think maybe if Black Panther villains were like, do you think if they were trying to stop going after the vibranium, do you think like because the vibranium, do you think because T'Challa has a lot of vibranium, so basically if he used because vibranium is like sound absorbent metal, so basically whenever there's a lot of damage due to the vibranium, do you think maybe there could be like a shockwave explosion like Wakanda could create those security kiss systems?
Yes, they can. You got a future, maybe writing some Black Panther comics. Yeah, vibranium is really interesting because it's the kind of thing that we call a MacGuffin, right? It's just like, it's the gimmick in the story. But it also has a symbolic power to it, you know? It absorbs stuff and then you can shoot it back out, you know? So like, we get that great scene in the comics, rather in the movie, where they're shooting guns at T'Challa and it doesn't do anything to him, which doesn't happen in the real world. Vibranium is great because it lets you imagine all these technologies that don't exist. And it is very fun to write, you know, a plane that can cross the Atlantic in 30 minutes and never get detected by radar or any other technologies. So yeah, he can do a lot of things with vibranium, and you can hopefully one day write those things that he does with vibranium too.
Instead of bouncing off, they go down. Automatically stop.
That's right, because vibranium absorbs the kinetic energy and the momentum, so they don't bounce because there's no energy left in them to propel them back outward. So yes, it is fall. But okay, let me ask you this. What's your name? Ramesses, nice to meet you. Do you know how you can defeat or get through the Black Panther's vibranium weave costume?
I think how you get past it is because the thing is, the vibranium you see, if it absorbs too much kinetic energy, I saw in a Black Panther comic once, it absorbed too much energy from gunshot and it blew up. But T'Challa still survived though.
That's right. Very good.
Wow.
You got to follow up that guy, whoever's next. So.
I don't know about all that. We'll give it a try. Thank you. I'll try to go through this really quick. My name is Marcel.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. If we had met years ago, you'd have been my bestie back when I was his age.
I was very shy, but go ahead.
One, thank you for coming to Pittsburgh.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me, Pittsburgh.
You're welcome. Two, I gotta say, seeing you both up on there, when I was growing up and reading comics, like whoever was making comics, I didn't even think about how they looked. But once I did start to think about how they looked, this is kind of a dream come true, just seeing the two of you up there talking
There's
comics.
more to be done, but yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah.
Three, hearing you talk about vibranium just now made me realize between Black Panther and Superman, these are two.
Here. Go ahead.
Oh, I love Superman. By the way, I'm going to be reading all your Superman articles later tonight.
Okay.
But you made me realize they both have metals attached to them as MacGuffins, but Black Panther's is vibranium and it gives him power, whereas Superman's is kryptonite and it takes away his power.
Also
So you just made me
from
think.
his home world, right? So it's like that memory of home can also weaken you. Which is, this is stuff that happens by accident.
I know. But I guess this is where I really wanted to ask you a question. So, and this is for both of you. So we focus on Black Panther's history and what everything, you know, that leads up to that in the present and modernism. In the spirit of Afrofuturism, what about the Black Panther in the future? How does T'Challa, as you see it, how does T'Challa envision the future for Wakanda and Wakanda's place in the world?
So I have a super long-winded answer, so you can go first. You can go first.
I don't know.
Okay. First,
I'm gonna.
super shameless plug on behalf of my homie. The next volume of Black Panther comics starts this week in a new issue #1. It's Black Panther #1. It's the storyline is called The Intergalactic Empire of Wakanda. And Ta-Nehisi's writing it. I've read the first issue, and it is amazing. You all don't know how often I text this man and be like, "Why did you make me cry again in a comic book that you wrote? Are you the problem? Am I the problem?" But I again had that response because he writes these powerful moments that again tap into the nature of this character. So the future starts there, Marcel. You know, in this series that I wrote, T'Challa sees a kind of two paths for Wakanda. They stay hidden, they stay in isolation. The outside world's gonna keep coming on them, right? The metaphor I've been using it's been like when you tell a kid that they can't have chocolate milk, right? They had that taste, they know it exists, it's in the fridge, it's on a shelf that they can't reach, but they're gonna open the fridge, get a chair, put a pillow on top of it, and try and get that chocolate milk, even though it means breaking their neck. That's what vibranium is to the outside world. And he knows that they're gonna want that taste of chocolate milk till the end of days, because it's something that they can't get anywhere else. Vibranium's the chocolate milk, the outside world is the little kid. That's one path. That means endless assaults and tightening the borders, and basically an evolutionary dead end for Wakanda. So T'Challa makes a decision to introduce the Wakanda to the outside world because this is what's actually going to help them grow. One of the things about Wakanda in the comics is it is an isolationist and rather xenophobic country, right? They don't have the most progressive mind views about people who ain't Wakandan. T'Challa sees that as something that they can improve. There's a speech that I had him give in the UN in issue 3 where the American representative of the UN says, "You guys got all this stuff. Why do you want to be part of this organization, the outside world?" And T'Challa says, "It's because Wakanda needs to learn trust." Again, this is a country built on an anti-colonialist premise. They don't trust anybody. You come up knocking on the door for a cup of sugar, we don't have sugar here. Not for y'all anyway. Wakanda needs to learn how to be part of the outside world. There's a line that I wrote in issue 2 where T'Challa's debating with Cyan, his uncle, who was the regent, basically the Black Panther, interim Black Panther until T'Challa became of age and became Black Panther. And he says, I think we need to engage with the outside world. And Cyan's like, no, what are you talking about? That's crazy talk. You should have never went to school to Columbia. Those Western universities mess with your mind. And T'Challa's retort is to reference the kind of big superheroic events that have been happening in the Marvel Universe, like Galactus, who's this big supervillain in the Marvel Universe, who eats whole worlds. He destroys a world and absorbs the energy that results from that destruction. And T'Challa says to his uncle, what would we have done if the world devourer was triumphant? Would we have sat here and beat on our drums and sang songs about being unconquered while the whole world burns around us? You need to be part of the world. It makes you better. It makes the rest of humanity better. So when you ask me about the future of the Black Panther, fictionally, I think he understands that Wakanda is this incredibly powerful actor on the world stage that can't overstep their bounds. They're not imperialists. They don't conquer, even though they have the power to. But they have symbolic power. And that's what they can use to hopefully improve the lot of the world. And that's why I thought the ending of the movie was so incredibly powerful. I thought, this is what it means to be a symbol. And this is what it means to have aspirations and have those aspirations be seated in somebody who looks like you. More questions?
Yeah, hopefully not to step on the toes of an upcoming essay, but wondering what that Netflix show you were really excited about, and maybe briefly to talk about why you.
Oh wow! Can I meet my deadline first? It's called The Rain. It's this post-apocalyptic science fiction show that was made in Denmark, and it is about apocalypse where the rain just starts killing people. It rains and a virus breaks out and you die in minutes. And it's about the people who survive, mostly a bunch of young kids. And it is one of the best post-apocalyptic cultural productions I've seen in a long, long time. So yeah, I gotta finish watching it and writing about it. Okay.
All right, so we have time for one more question.
Hi.
Hello.
In the movie, they changed M'Baku a little bit.
Yeah.
Because he was originally called Man-Ape
Oh,
in the
I know.
comics.
I got a story about that. Go ahead.
Yeah. Clearly, a really good decision on the movie maker's part. In making your comics, was there anything that you wanted to change from the history of Black Panther to be less problematic, or is there anything that you would like to change should you get the chance again?
Okay, the first part, M'Baku, I was lucky enough to attend the world premiere of the movie in Los Angeles, and I had the chance to meet Winston Duke, who portrayed the character, who's tall and big and tall. And I told him, I was like, you don't understand. Me and my friends used to clown on this character. He was like a big old goof in a white gorilla suit called Man-Ape. He wasn't hot. And I was like, people are not going to laugh at this character anymore because of you, because of what you did. I don't know if he got it then. I hope he gets it now. So part of that question I already answered with Inyami. I want to make Black Panther's mother a real character. You know, very often in superhero comics, a parent's job is to die, to provide that psychic trauma motivation so that you can avenge them. And she died in childbirth, so she didn't even get like the good stuff. I want to make her a real person. So that's something, a little change that I've made to the lore. The other part is I really want to write more on the character of the White Wolf, who in the comics, T'Challa's dad, adopts this little white boy who dies, who was the only survivor of a plane crash outside of Wakanda. It's this brilliant subversion of the Tarzan myth, where like the white kid gets found in the jungle and doesn't become the Lord of the Jungle. He becomes the consigliere, the right-hand man, the fixer of the real king of the jungle. And he's always been a fascinating character to me because you're the only white guy in Wakanda. Like, what is that like? And then you wind up becoming ultra loyal, ultra nationalist inside of a socio-political system where people like you don't exist. So I always felt like there was this amazing psychological depth and richness to his character. So I want to write about him and T'Challa having this uneasy relationship, which again is something I inherited. But I want to talk about that. What was it like to see your little brother, who's the son of the king, yeah, but so are you, but he's your little brother who gets to become king. And meanwhile, you've been servicing his dad in these kind of shifty political ways, and then T'Challa has this idealism that he's operating off of, which he feels like it's important to put this face on the world, on Wakanda as it's meeting the world. And the White Wolf is like, but you know that guy who's messing with you, I could just go kill him, right? Like I can still do that. He's a character that I love being able to touch. Mm-hmm. And you know, other stuff like Ramonda, I was talking to Ta-Nehisi about this, but like T'Challa's introduced in '66. Inyami's only really mentioned in passing. Ramonda, the woman who's acknowledged as the woman who raised him and his mother, she wasn't introduced as a character till like I want to say '86 or '88. So he spent 20 years as a fictional character essentially without a mother. So we know she's South African. She's an outsider to Wakanda. I want to show the moment where her and T'Chaka met. You know, like she, you know, and why she stayed in Wakanda. I mean, why wouldn't you? But she had very specific reasons to want to stay in Wakanda, not go back to apartheid. But I want to talk about that a little bit. So yeah. Last question, right? Thank you for asking questions.
Let's give Yona and Evan one more round of applause. All of us at City of Asylum would like to thank you for coming. We welcome you to stay. The bookstore will reopen shortly, and our presenters will be around for a bit. We hope you enjoyed tonight's programming and that you will join us again soon. Thank you, and good night.